This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stock Box interview. Joining us today is Dan Gooding, the Executive Director of Nuformix PLC, following an update on the NXP002 program, which is a new form of Tranilast being developed as an inhaled treatment for lung fibrosis, also known as IPF. Now, the company conducted studies on inflammation-related biomarkers and the duration of action on the NXP002 in human IPF lung tissue and healthy lung tissue models. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Dan. First of all, how are you doing?
Very well, how are you?
Very good, thank you. It's good to be talking to you for the first time here. Just to start us off, could you perhaps give us a bit of an introduction to the company? Lung fibrosis, the problem, and of course the NXP002 program treatment that you are developing.
Yes, of course. So I'll start with Nuformix. That's what you'd describe as a drug development company. We develop therapies up to a point of proof of concept. In our case, therapies for cancer and, as you've rightly said, for IPF, lung fibrosis. What makes us a little bit different is that we are developing therapies based on known drugs, which is not entirely uncommon as well. However, what makes us unique is we've got some enabling intellectual property that allows us to do things with known drugs that are not otherwise possible. So those that are maybe not familiar with how the industry works, I was listening to a podcast recently looking at trends in innovation from 2022. Large pharma companies, when they're developing drugs towards clinic and approval and ultimately use in patients, their current development pipelines have something like 2/3 of products in them that have actually been bought in from other companies. Mm-hmm. So you have companies such as Nuformix developing therapies up to a point of proof of concept, and they look to out-license and partner with those larger pharma companies. And so that's Nuformix's business model. We have made an announcement today about our NXP2 program. That's focused, as you said, on lung fibrosis. We have a drug there and a program there called NXP002, which is based on an improved form of Tranilast. Tranilast is a drug that has been approved for a while, since I think the late 80s in Japan and other Asian territories, and has picked up uses for things like scarring and asthma, so relatively relevant conditions. We have data, and there's a lot of public data. There's a lot of data in the public domain that supports the use of Tranilast in fibrotic diseases such as lung fibrosis. What is not currently possible is using Tranilast orally for long periods of time to treat these kinds of chronic conditions. And what we've been able to do is we've been able to modify the properties of Tranilast that allow us to use it in an inhaled setting. So we can now deliver this drug to the site of action, to the lung where it's required, and we can get it into the deep lung where this fibrosis is taking place. Lung fibrosis itself is a high mortality condition. Patients that are diagnosed with it usually have about 2 to 5 years of life left. The reason that this is such a problematic condition is fibrosis is taking away the function of the lung. This progressive scarring of the tissue, which is initiated by things like asbestosis or something, this takes away the ability of the lung to get oxygen into the blood. And when you're unable to do that, that's obviously not a great situation. So there are a couple of marketed therapies for this condition, both of which are blockbuster therapies. This is a rare disease category. And data shows that they are not massively life extending, but they also have some really significant side effects. I think the sort of discontinuation rates or anything between sort of 50 to 80% in certain patient groups due to the severe side effect profile that each of these therapies have. So our concept with NXP2 is to be able to deliver the drug as an inhaled therapy. This is focusing the dose to the site of action, the lung, which means we don't get any of these off-target kind of side effects that cause patients major problems. And we will be doing this on top of their existing therapy. So patients will have found one of these two standards of care and a dose that they can kind of cope with. And so what we'll be doing is adding NXP2 on top of those therapies. And what our data shows we recently announced data on the kind of fibrosis aspect of where NXP2 is active. Today, we announced the activity of the drug also on this inflammation piece, which is important in treating exacerbations in IPF. And so we're showing that in a really close to patient disease model, we can get a handle on disease progression and improve the efficacy of standard of care treatments. So that was one aspect of what we announced today. But the really exciting aspect of what we announced today for me was that we've finally been able to find a way of showing that the drug post-inhalation has a really long duration of action. Patients that are taking inhalation therapies don't want to be using their inhaler or their device, every hour or something. The typical standard sort of number of uses of an inhaler for high compliance is about twice a day. And so by showing that we've got a duration of action following dosing of 12 hours plus, it means that our therapy is now ticked pretty much all of the boxes that we need to tick at this stage to validate its use as a treatment for these conditions.
Okay, so those are the two key things that I picked up on: the duration of action there, and of course the being used on top of standards of care. So currently there are current standards of care for treating fibrosis, and your treatment will work in addition to that.
That's right. So whereas these standards of care, as data shows, they have very high discontinuation rates, and the trajectory for disease progression doesn't change that much, not massively life extending. There's a real need to improve those situations. This condition is really debilitating as people, kind of get worse in their condition. They're carrying around oxygen cylinders. They're out of breath. They're really struggling. So to add these, side effects such as, really severe diarrhea or severe nausea or photosensitivity of the skin, which are really, really common, you're just making what's already a really bad situation a lot worse. And the disease has not got many signs of actually, improving or certainly or stabilizing. And so this is what we believe that we can change. We believe that on top of standard of care, we can improve efficacy of current therapy. And the reason that standard of care piece on top of standard of care piece is important is because for us to be able to rapidly then develop this drug, or a partner that we may find to rapidly develop this drug, the most accessible patient population that you can use in a clinical study are those patients already receiving a therapy. So that means that we can develop quickly and also show, as our data supports, that we can have an enhanced efficacy in a clinical study. Okay.
I mean, would you say that the announcement today, when you talk about the duration of action there, and of course the standards of care, is that really a transformational moment for the company? I mean, does it really change the landscape of IPF treatment and give the work that you're doing a lot of advantages to treating this problem?
I think what it does for the program is, we've got all kinds of, really compelling data. We've done things like show that, as this drug is inhaled and we increase the dose, we increase the response against inflammation biomarkers and these kinds of things. So great, it tells us the drug works. You can deliver its kind of pharmacological effect via inhalation. Brilliant. We've been then using these, high challenge, close to patient disease models where we're actually able to. One of the few ways in which IPF patients can survive for long periods is actually having a lung transplant. And we work with a research partner where when a patient for IPF is at the top of that list for receiving a lung transplant, we actually get access to their IPF lungs. And we're able to use that human IPF tissue as a test ground for our drug in terms of how it halts that sort of fibrotic sort of process. So, really close to patient model, and we get great data from that. But one thing that we've never really been able to demonstrate with high confidence is this duration of access piece. It's wonderful that you can get a really nice effect when the drug is inhaled. It's wonderful that it seems really clear that this drug can treat important parts of disease progression. But if following inhalation, which is the method that we've targeted, the drug doesn't hang around very long enough to exert its pharmacology, that's a problem. And so this could have potentially been an Achilles heels for this kind of a therapy. But what this data shows is it's basically the last sort of preclinical development risk that we needed to discharge to give potential partners confidence that our drug and our program can be developed successfully for these kind of end uses.
Okay, well, you mentioned there about potential partners. Of course, the RNS talked a lot about the next steps to expand the studies, but also initiating a partnership process. Can you elaborate at all on the kind of partners you're looking for and how these partnerships might continue to go or contribute, I suppose, to the Nuformix financial health and future prospects?
Yeah, of course. So, as I mentioned earlier, it's really commonplace for these kinds of interactions to happen between small innovating companies and large pharma. A really good example in this space would be, say, AstraZeneca's licensing of a RedX drug, which was a similar stage to where NXP002 is now. That was in licensed at a preclinical stage, and those kinds of transactions, usually involve a mixture of upfront payments and then future milestones, and even in some cases, low royalties around future sales of the drug as it's developed forward and eventually reaches market. And that's the kind of sorts of transactions that we're looking to emulate. The IPF market is attractive to pharma. The kind of therapies, it being a rare disease space, are very expensive. I mentioned it, although it's a rare disease space, the therapies in this space are blockbuster products, meaning that they make over $1 billion a year. Okay, so you're talking about annual costs in the US of something like $130,000 per year treatment. These are attractive spaces to play for pharma companies to get into these kind of niche disease areas. And so we'll be actively looking at those companies, looking at that market. And there does appear to be an increasing number, although it is a challenging, development space. But there are certain attributes of our program that I think help de-risk what is usually quite a risky process. So we already know the fact that we're using a known drug. It's attractive that we've discharged any kind of safety risk, as the safety of the drug is quite well understood. The drug's got a history of use in humans, so we know about its pharmacological action, and a lot of the data that we've generated help supports that. There's a lot that we can say to partners to give them confidence based on the data that we've generated that the drug makes sense, and the concept around inhalation delivery makes sense, and therefore, we hope to be able to reach out to a variety of different potential partners and look to emulate something like the AZ RedX transaction.
Okay. We mentioned there about de-risking, and that was what stuck out to me. This seems like the news this morning significantly does de-risk. Is there more de-risking to do before you can go to potential partners? When would you want to be actually approaching people?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think now is a very good time to be able to do that. I think we've got what I would say the first time that we've had a complete sort of data set that helps us tell a story from a preclinical perspective across a range of different models that are relevant to IPF. Also models that demonstrate that we can deliver the drug successfully via inhalation. So for the first time, all of the pillars that we need are in place to be able to tell that story. And whether we out-license the program in full, whether we reach some kind of joint development agreement, that's what we'll be pushing for in order to sort of move the product forward in terms of next stages of development. So, you mentioned about risk. There are risks that each stage of a clinical trial discharges as it goes forward. This drug is an oral drug. It hasn't yet been used in the lung. So one would need to demonstrate that the drug can be tolerated in the lung. But we've, been dosing in preclinical studies at very high doses and looked at the effect of the drug at very high doses in human tissue, and we've seen no evidence so far of any kind of meaningful tox signal. So that risk seems to be largely discharged. What was really interesting was in the late 2022, we started seeing various publications emerge in the public domain that had looked at the use of this drug orally to treat lung fibrosis associated with COVID for short periods. And there are some really good data signals there. Oral delivery of the drug or use of the drug in IPF is not relevant because the drug can't be used for long periods for treating what is a chronic disease. But these data signals that we saw from post-COVID are really helpful as well in terms of adding confidence that in a very relevant condition, the drug can demonstrate efficacy. So there's a lot about the program that helps us demonstrate that it's de-risked, and I'd like to think that message will be received favorably by potential partners.
Okay. Well, in terms of next steps, then you obviously looking for potential partners to potentially out-license it. But in the same instance, would you be looking to advance it further down the clinical trial? In parallel with trying to find partners, and then also, are you able to fund that?
Well, I think what we've recently announced, I think we announced on March 13th, we've got our interims that are due out by June 30th. We'll be announcing those shortly, and then our financial position will be available for review. We've talked about the next steps that we're going to undertake today in the announcement around just increasing the robustness of some of the data that we've got as we present it to partners, but then also undertaking that activity in anger in terms of out licensing and opening up discussions. We have done a lot of work in terms of stripping out a lot of the cost base of the company. It's a very lean operating company. Therefore, the activities that we are describing in terms of next steps are funded by our existing cash position. The BD activities in terms of out licensing will be conducted by myself and Nuformix's chairman, Julian Gilbert. And in terms of the other activities that we described, our cash position allows us to do that. But in terms of going into clinical development, that's where a partner starts to play an important role, and that's the driver for really trying to kind of make that kind of transaction take place.
Okay, well, I'll be watching the company closely to see when or how those discussions develop with potential partners, and hopefully we can catch up when appropriate. But for now, thank you very much for your time, Dan Gooding, the Executive Director of Nuformix PLC.
Thanks, really appreciate your interest.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter, and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programs at stopboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.